In the dim candlelight of his study, surrounded by the weight of history and the whispers of fallen empires, a truth emerged that would echo through centuries: power belongs only to those who dare to seize it without apology, without excuse, and without the crippling need for validation from others. This understanding, forged in the crucible of political upheaval and personal struggle, represents more than mere ambition. It is the fundamental recognition that in a world governed by force and cunning, only the self-transformed can truly command their destiny. The path to absolute self-mastery begins with a brutal acknowledgement of human nature itself. Men are not born equal in their capacity for greatness, nor are they entitled to power simply by virtue of existence. The weak cling to moral platitudes and seek comfort in the approval of others, while the strong understand that true strength comes from within, forged through deliberate destruction of one's own limitations and illusions. Consider the merchant who rises before dawn, not because society demands it, but because he has recognized that comfort is the enemy of achievement. While others sleep, dreaming of fortune without effort, he calculates, plans, and executes. When rivals mock his obsession with work, he does not justify himself or seek their understanding. He simply continues, knowing that their mockery stems from their own weakness, their inability to sacrifice present comfort for future dominance. This merchant embodies the first principle of Machiavellian self-transformation, the complete rejection of external validation. He has destroyed the part of himself that seeks approval, that fears judgment, that hesitates in the face of criticism. In doing so, he has become untouchable by the very weapons that destroy lesser men. Their words cannot wound him because he has already wounded himself more deeply in the pursuit of excellence. Their disapproval cannot discourage him because his motivation comes from within, from a vision of himself that transcends their limited understanding. The transformation from weakness to strength is not a gentle process. It requires the deliberate assassination of one's comfortable self. The man who would be powerful must first identify every aspect of his character that makes him dependent on others: his need for sympathy, his desire to be liked, his fear of standing alone. These are not merely character flaws, they are chains that bind him to mediocrity. In the courts of Renaissance Italy, where survival depended on one's ability to navigate treacherous political waters, the weak were quickly identified and eliminated. They were the ones who sought to please everyone, who changed their positions based on popular opinion, who relied on the protection of others rather than building their own strength. Their destruction was inevitable, not because they lacked intelligence or resources, but because they remained slaves to their own weakness. The strong, by contrast, had already undergone their own internal revolution. They had identified their dependencies and systematically eliminated them. The prince who needed the love of his subjects was vulnerable to manipulation; the one who commanded through strength and calculated benevolence was secure. The courtier who shaped his opinions to match those of his superiors was expendable; the one who spoke truth from a position of unshakable self-confidence was indispensable. This principle extends far beyond the political realm into every aspect of human endeavor. The artist who creates to please critics will never produce work of lasting significance, for his vision is corrupted by external concerns. But the artist who destroys his need for immediate approval, who is willing to be misunderstood for decades if necessary, creates from a place of authentic power. His work may initially be rejected, mocked, or ignored, but it cannot be destroyed because it springs from an indestructible source: his own uncompromising vision. The businessman who operates according to market trends and popular opinion will always be reactive, always vulnerable to sudden changes in sentiment. But the one who has developed an internal compass, who bases his decisions on principle and calculation rather than approval, creates his own market conditions. He may face temporary setbacks, but he cannot be fundamentally undermined because his strength is not dependent on external circumstances. This self-transformation is perhaps most clearly illustrated in the realm of personal relationships. The individual who seeks love through weakness, through neediness, accommodation, and self-sacrifice, will inevitably be despised by the very people whose affection he craves. His desperation broadcasts his low value, his willingness to compromise broadcasts his lack of principles, and his neediness broadcasts his fundamental inadequacy. But the person who has destroyed these weak impulses, who offers affection from a position of strength rather than need, who maintains his principles regardless of social pressure, becomes genuinely attractive to others. Paradoxically, by ceasing to need approval, he becomes worthy of it. By refusing to compromise his values for acceptance, he gains genuine respect. By standing alone when necessary, he attracts others who wish to stand with someone of substance. The process of internal transformation requires constant vigilance and ruthless self-examination. Each day presents opportunities to choose strength over weakness, independence over dependence, principle over popularity. The man who would be powerful must become his own harshest critic, identifying and eliminating every trace of weakness before his enemies can exploit it. This is not merely a matter of adopting a tough exterior while remaining soft within. True transformation penetrates to the core of one's being. It means genuinely not caring about social approval, not merely pretending indifference. It means finding one's own approval sufficient, not simply claiming to be self-sufficient while secretly craving validation. It means developing real principles that one will defend regardless of cost, not merely adopting the pose of conviction. The weak man fears solitude because it forces him to confront his own inadequacy. The strong man seeks solitude because it allows him to commune with his own excellence. The weak man needs constant reassurance because his self-worth is fragile. The strong man provides his own reassurance because his self-worth is unshakable. The weak man changes his opinions based on social pressure because he has no firm foundation. The strong man maintains his positions because they are based on careful thought and uncompromising principle. In the arena of professional competition, this distinction becomes particularly clear. The employee who seeks security through pleasing his superiors will always be vulnerable to changes in management or company policy. His value is entirely dependent on external factors beyond his control. But the employee who has made himself genuinely indispensable through skill and integrity, who delivers results regardless of politics or popularity, cannot be easily replaced or discarded. The entrepreneur who builds his business on relationships and goodwill may prosper temporarily, but he is ultimately vulnerable to changes in sentiment or circumstance. The entrepreneur who builds his business on value creation and sound principles may face more initial resistance, but he creates something truly lasting and powerful. This transformation is not without its costs. The man who destroys his weak self must often walk alone, at least initially. He must be prepared to be misunderstood, criticized, and even attacked by those who remain trapped in weakness. He must accept that many people will be uncomfortable with his strength and will attempt to drag him back down to their level. But these costs are temporary and ultimately insignificant compared to the alternative. The weak man pays the price of weakness every day, in opportunities lost to fear, in respect forfeited to neediness, in potential unrealized due to dependence on others. His suffering is constant and degrading, while the strong man's sacrifice is temporary and elevating. The key to successful transformation lies in understanding that weakness is not merely the absence of strength, it is an active force that must be deliberately destroyed. It is not enough to simply develop new strengths, one must systematically eliminate old weaknesses. The process is similar to building muscle while losing fat, both must happen simultaneously for optimal results. This requires a level of self-honesty that most people find unbearable. It means acknowledging every instance of people-pleasing, every moment of seeking validation, every compromise of principle for social acceptance. It means recognizing these behaviors not as harmless social lubricants, but as symptoms of a fundamental weakness that undermines all attempts at genuine achievement. The man who would be truly powerful must become comfortable with being disliked by weak people, for their dislike is often a sign that he is moving in the right direction. When the mediocre criticize someone for being too ambitious, too uncompromising, or too independent, they are often revealing their own limitations rather than identifying genuine flaws in their target. This is not to say that all criticism should be dismissed or that strength requires rudeness or cruelty. True strength is often quiet and controlled, expressing itself through results rather than rhetoric. But it is uncompromising in its core principles and immune to manipulation through social pressure. The transformation from weakness to strength is ultimately a transformation in one's relationship with reality itself. The weak man lives in a world of wishful thinking, believing that good intentions and social harmony will somehow lead to success and happiness. The strong man lives in a world of facts and forces, understanding that reality operates according to specific laws that must be understood and utilized rather than ignored or denied. This realistic understanding extends to every area of life. In business, it means recognizing that profit and value creation matter more than good intentions. In relationships, it means understanding that attraction and respect cannot be negotiated or demanded. In personal development, it means acknowledging that growth requires sustained effort and sacrifice rather than mere desire for improvement. The man who has successfully destroyed his weak self operates from this foundation of reality-based thinking. He does not waste energy on resentment when others succeed through superior effort or strategy. He does not expect rewards without results or respect without accomplishment. He does not believe that the world owes him anything simply because he exists or because he has good intentions. Instead, he focuses entirely on developing his capabilities and delivering results. He understands that the world rewards value creation, not need or desire. He recognizes that respect must be earned through consistent demonstration of competence and integrity. He accepts that his success or failure depends primarily on his own choices and efforts rather than external circumstances or other people's decisions. This mindset creates an extraordinary sense of freedom and power. When a man's happiness and success depend entirely on factors within his control, his effort, his skill development, his choices, he becomes genuinely independent. He may still choose to work with others and form relationships, but he does so from a position of strength rather than need. This independence is perhaps the most valuable asset a person can develop. It allows him to make decisions based on what is right rather than what is popular. It enables him to pursue long-term goals even when they require short-term sacrifice or unpopular choices. It makes him attractive to high-quality people while repelling those who seek to exploit weakness or dependency. The culmination of this first phase of transformation is the development of what might be called internal sovereignty, complete self-governance and self-sufficiency in matters of judgment, motivation, and validation. The internally sovereign individual needs no external authority to tell him what to think, what to value, or what to pursue. He has developed his own internal compass based on careful observation, logical analysis, and principled reasoning. This internal sovereignty manifests in every aspect of his behavior. He speaks his mind clearly and directly, not because he enjoys conflict, but because he sees no reason to hide his thoughts or distort his communication for social convenience. He pursues his goals consistently, not because he is obsessed or driven by external pressure, but because he has chosen these goals through careful consideration and remains committed to them regardless of changing circumstances. He maintains his standards in all areas of life, not because he is rigid or judgmental, but because he understands that standards are the foundation of excellence and that compromise in one area inevitably leads to deterioration in others. He refuses to participate in activities or relationships that conflict with his values, not because he is antisocial, but because he recognizes that such participation would undermine his integrity and effectiveness. The man who has achieved this level of internal transformation discovers that external obstacles become far less significant. When critics attack him, their words have no power because he does not depend on their approval. When competitors try to undermine him, their efforts often fail because his strength comes from within rather than from external circumstances. When circumstances change unexpectedly, he adapts quickly because his core identity and motivation remain stable regardless of external conditions. This is the foundation upon which all genuine power rests, not the power that comes from position or wealth or connection, but the power that comes from complete self-mastery and independence. It is the power that cannot be taken away because it does not depend on anything external. It is the power that grows stronger under pressure because it is based on principles rather than circumstances. Part 2: The Arsenal of Influence. With the foundation of internal sovereignty firmly established, the transformed individual must now turn his attention to the practical application of power in the external world. Having destroyed his own weakness and achieved independence from the opinions and approval of others, he is now capable of wielding influence with precision and effectiveness. This second phase of development focuses on understanding and mastering the mechanisms through which power operates in human society. The first principle of external power is the recognition that all human interaction involves some element of influence. Every conversation is an attempt to shape perception, every gesture communicates status, every decision affects the balance of power in relationships. The naive believe that power is something that exists only in formal hierarchies or political structures, but the sophisticated understand that power dynamics permeate every aspect of human existence. Consider the seemingly simple act of a business meeting. The weak participant enters seeking approval and consensus, afraid to express controversial opinions or challenge prevailing assumptions. He speaks tentatively, seeks constant validation for his ideas, and readily abandons his positions when faced with resistance. Such behavior immediately communicates low status and weakness to everyone present, ensuring that his influence remains minimal regardless of the quality of his ideas. The strong participant, by contrast, enters the meeting with clear objectives and unwavering confidence in his own judgment. He presents his ideas clearly and forcefully, not because he is arrogant or dismissive of others, but because he has thought through his positions carefully and stands behind them completely. When challenged, he responds with facts and reasoning rather than defensiveness or accommodation. When others present inferior ideas, he does not pretend agreement for the sake of social harmony but offers constructive alternatives based on his superior understanding. The difference in outcomes is dramatic and immediate. The weak participant's ideas are quickly forgotten or marginalized, regardless of their merit. The strong participant's ideas shape the direction of the discussion and, ultimately, the decisions that emerge from it. This happens not because of any formal authority or manipulation, but because strength naturally attracts followers while weakness repels them. This same dynamic operates in every context where humans interact. In social situations, the person who needs approval becomes boring and forgettable, while the person who offers genuine value becomes magnetic and memorable. In romantic relationships, the partner who supplicates and compromises becomes unattractive, while the partner who maintains independence and standards becomes increasingly desirable. In professional environments, the employee who seeks security through conformity becomes expendable, while the employee who demonstrates unique value becomes indispensable. Understanding these dynamics allows the sophisticated individual to operate with tremendous effectiveness across all domains of life. He recognizes that influence flows naturally to those who demonstrate competence, confidence, and independence, while it drains away from those who display need, uncertainty, or dependence. This understanding guides every aspect of his interaction with others. The second principle of external power is the strategic use of attention and availability. The weak person makes himself constantly available to others, believing that accessibility equals value. He responds immediately to every request, accepts every invitation, and tries to be helpful in every situation. This behavior, while seemingly generous, actually communicates low value and creates contempt rather than appreciation. The strong person, by contrast, carefully controls his attention and availability as precious resources. He understands that scarcity creates value and that constant availability suggests lack of important alternatives. When he does give his attention or assistance, it carries weight precisely because it is not freely given to everyone who asks. This principle applies with particular force in professional relationships. The consultant who is always available for last-minute requests and emergency meetings trains his clients to disrespect his time and undervalue his expertise. The consultant who maintains clear boundaries and charges premium rates for urgent requests trains his clients to plan ahead and treat his services as valuable. The same dynamic operates in personal relationships. The friend who drops everything to help with every minor crisis becomes taken for granted, while the friend who offers assistance selectively and, after careful consideration, becomes truly appreciated. The romantic partner who sacrifices all other interests and relationships to focus exclusively on one person becomes suffocating and unattractive, while the partner who maintains his own life and interests becomes intriguing and desirable. Mastering this principle requires the ability to say no without guilt or extensive justification. The strong person understands that every yes to one thing is a no to something else, and he makes these choices consciously and strategically. He does not feel obligated to explain his priorities to others or seek their approval for his decisions about how to spend his time and energy. The third principle of external power is the strategic use of information and knowledge. In any relationship or situation, the person who possesses superior information holds significant advantage over those who operate with incomplete or inaccurate understanding. This advantage can be leveraged to create value, prevent problems, or shape outcomes in favorable directions. The weak person typically shares information freely and completely, believing that transparency and openness will create trust and reciprocity. While this approach may sometimes work in intimate personal relationships, it is generally naive and counterproductive in competitive environments. Information is a form of currency, and, like any valuable resource, it should be shared strategically rather than carelessly. The strong person develops multiple sources of information and maintains careful control over what he shares and with whom. He understands that knowledge shared inappropriately can be used against him, while knowledge withheld strategically can provide ongoing advantage. This does not mean being dishonest or manipulative, but rather being selective and strategic about information sharing. This principle is particularly important in business relationships. The negotiator who reveals his maximum budget early in the process severely weakens his position. The job candidate who shares too much information about his current situation and alternatives reduces his leverage. The entrepreneur who discusses his strategy and plans openly with potential competitors undermines his own competitive advantage. The sophisticated individual develops the habit of gathering information while sharing it judiciously. He asks thoughtful questions and listens carefully to the answers. He observes behavior and draws conclusions from actions rather than relying solely on words. He maintains multiple sources of information and cross-references them to develop accurate understanding of situations and people. The fourth principle of external power is the cultivation of strategic relationships. The weak person forms relationships based primarily on emotional compatibility and shared interests, believing that genuine connection requires personal affinity. While such relationships may be personally satisfying, they often provide limited strategic value. The strong person recognizes that the most valuable relationships are often those that provide complementary capabilities, access to different networks, or opportunities for mutual value creation. He actively seeks relationships with people who possess skills, knowledge, connections, or resources that enhance his own capabilities. This does not mean being cold or calculating in relationships, but rather being strategic about which relationships to prioritize and invest in. The sophisticated individual understands that time and emotional energy are limited resources that should be allocated thoughtfully. He chooses to deepen relationships with people who appreciate his value and can reciprocate with value of their own. In practice, this means spending less time with people who drain energy or provide little value, and more time with people who challenge him to grow, offer opportunities for collaboration, or possess qualities worth emulating. It means being generous with high-value individuals while maintaining appropriate boundaries with those who seek to exploit generosity without reciprocation. The fifth principle of external power is the strategic management of reputation and image. The weak person either ignores his reputation, believing that good intentions and honest work will naturally create positive perceptions, or obsesses over his image in ways that appear desperate and manipulative. Both approaches are ineffective. The strong person understands that reputation is a valuable asset that must be carefully cultivated and protected. He recognizes that perceptions often matter as much as reality, and that others make important decisions based on their impressions of his character, competence, and reliability. Therefore, he manages his reputation deliberately and strategically. This involves consistent demonstration of key qualities that create positive impressions: competence in his chosen field, reliability in meeting commitments, integrity in dealing with others, and confidence in his own abilities. He understands that reputation is built slowly through consistent action over time, but can be damaged quickly through careless mistakes or poor judgment. The sophisticated individual also understands the importance of association in reputation management. People judge us not only by our own actions but by the company we keep and the causes we support. Therefore, he chooses his associations carefully, aligning himself with high-quality people and worthwhile endeavors while avoiding connections that might damage his reputation. The sixth principle of external power is the strategic use of conflict and confrontation. The weak person avoids conflict at almost any cost, believing that harmony and agreement are always preferable to disagreement and tension. This approach typically results in his needs and interests being consistently overlooked or trampled by more assertive individuals. The strong person understands that conflict is often necessary for achieving important objectives and maintaining respect. He does not seek conflict for its own sake, but neither does he avoid it when his principles or interests are at stake. He engages in conflict strategically, with clear objectives and appropriate tactics. Effective conflict management requires several key capabilities: the ability to remain calm under pressure, the skill to articulate positions clearly and persuasively, the wisdom to choose appropriate battles, and the strength to persist when persistence is warranted. The sophisticated individual develops these capabilities through practice and experience. This principle is particularly important in leadership roles. The leader who avoids difficult conversations and confrontations with poor performers creates a culture of mediocrity and unfairness. The leader who addresses problems directly and decisively creates a culture of accountability and excellence. The same principle applies in personal relationships. The individual who accepts poor treatment to avoid conflict trains others to treat him poorly. The individual who sets clear boundaries and enforces them consistently earns respect and better treatment from others. The seventh principle of external power is the strategic use of rewards and consequences. The weak person often provides rewards regardless of behavior, believing that unconditional generosity will inspire reciprocal kindness. In practice, this approach typically leads to exploitation and resentment. The strong person understands that human behavior responds to incentives and consequences. He provides rewards for behavior he wants to encourage and imposes consequences for behavior he wants to discourage. This approach, when implemented fairly and consistently, shapes behavior far more effectively than lectures or emotional appeals. This principle requires the ability to delay gratification and maintain consistency even when it would be easier to make exceptions. The parent who threatens consequences but fails to impose them teaches children to ignore future threats. The manager who promises rewards but fails to deliver them destroys motivation and trust. The friend who accepts poor treatment without consequences encourages continued poor treatment. The sophisticated individual understands that being perceived as predictable in matters of rewards and consequences creates tremendous influence. People modify their behavior to earn his approval and avoid his disapproval because they understand that both have meaningful impact. The eighth principle of external power is the cultivation of multiple options and alternatives. The weak person typically focuses all his energy on single opportunities or relationships, believing that commitment and focus require putting all eggs in one basket. This approach creates vulnerability and reduces negotiating power. The strong person systematically develops multiple options in all areas of life. He cultivates multiple income sources, maintains multiple professional relationships, and develops multiple pathways to achieve his objectives. This approach creates genuine independence and tremendously increases his negotiating power in all situations. When a person has multiple good alternatives, he can afford to walk away from opportunities or relationships that do not meet his standards. This willingness to walk away often results in better terms and greater respect from others. People instinctively recognize when someone has genuine alternatives and treat such individuals with greater care and consideration. The cultivation of options requires ongoing effort and strategic thinking. It means building relationships before they are needed, developing skills before they are required, and creating opportunities before they are necessary. The sophisticated individual understands that the time to build alternatives is when things are going well, not when crisis strikes. The ninth principle of external power is the strategic use of timing and patience. The weak person often acts impulsively, driven by emotion or immediate need rather than strategic consideration. He makes decisions under pressure, accepts the first acceptable offer, and tries to force outcomes through urgency and persistence. The strong person understands that timing often determines the success or failure of any initiative. He develops the patience to wait for optimal conditions and the wisdom to recognize when such conditions exist. He understands that forced outcomes are typically inferior to naturally developed ones. This principle applies to every area of life. In business, the right opportunity presented at the wrong time may fail completely, while a mediocre opportunity presented at the perfect moment may succeed brilliantly. In relationships, forced intimacy or commitment typically creates resistance, while naturally developed connection creates genuine bonding. The sophisticated individual develops the ability to sense timing and the patience to wait for optimal moments. He understands that this approach often requires short-term sacrifice for long-term advantage, but that such sacrifice is typically well rewarded. The 10th principle of external power is the integration of all previous principles into a coherent strategy for achieving specific objectives. The weak person may occasionally apply one or more of these principles in isolation, but fails to integrate them into a comprehensive approach. This lack of integration severely limits effectiveness. The strong person develops the ability to apply multiple principles simultaneously and strategically. He combines internal sovereignty with strategic relationship building, information management with reputation cultivation, and conflict resolution with option development. This integrated approach creates synergistic effects that multiply his influence and effectiveness. The mastery of external power requires continuous learning and adaptation. Human dynamics evolve, circumstances change, and new challenges emerge. The sophisticated individual remains alert to these changes and modifies his approach accordingly while maintaining his core principles. The ultimate goal of mastering external power is not domination or manipulation of others, but rather the creation of conditions that allow for mutual value creation and genuine achievement. The person who has achieved both internal sovereignty and external effectiveness becomes capable of building lasting relationships, creating meaningful value, and achieving objectives that seemed impossible when he operated from weakness. This mastery creates a positive cycle of increasing influence and opportunity. As his effectiveness becomes apparent, high-quality people seek him out for collaboration. As his reputation grows, better opportunities become available. As his skills develop, his ability to create value for others increases. This cycle continues throughout his life, creating ever-expanding possibilities for achievement and contribution. Part 3, The Eternal Campaign. The final phase of Machiavellian development transcends individual achievement and enters the realm of lasting legacy. Having mastered both internal sovereignty and external influence, the truly powerful individual must now grapple with the ultimate questions of purpose, sustainability, and the creation of value that outlasts his own existence. This is not merely about accumulating more power or achieving greater success, but about wielding power in service of something greater than immediate self-interest. The transition from personal power to purposeful power represents one of the most challenging aspects of human development. Many individuals who successfully master themselves and learn to influence others become trapped in an endless cycle of accumulation and achievement that ultimately proves hollow. They achieve everything they thought they wanted, only to discover that achievement without purpose provides little lasting satisfaction. The sophisticated individual recognizes that true power must be directed toward objectives that create value beyond the self. This recognition typically emerges naturally as one achieves mastery over personal and interpersonal dynamics. Having satisfied immediate needs for security, recognition, and control, the mature individual begins to consider what legacy he wishes to create and what contribution he can make to the larger human enterprise. This shift in focus does not represent abandonment of self-interest, but rather expansion of self-interest to include larger considerations. The person who operates at this level understands that his ultimate well-being and significance depend on creating value that transcends his individual existence. He recognizes that the most profound satisfaction comes not from what he can take from the world, but from what he can give to it. In the realm of business, this principle manifests as the difference between extractive and creative enterprise. The extractive entrepreneur focuses primarily on extracting maximum value from existing resources and relationships, often through manipulation, cost-cutting, or market domination. While such approaches may generate short-term profits, they typically create little lasting value and often destroy more than they create. The creative entrepreneur, by contrast, focuses on generating new value through innovation, efficiency improvements, or the solution of genuine problems. Such enterprises often require more patience and investment than extractive approaches, but they create sustainable competitive advantages and lasting value for all stakeholders. Consider the technology executive who has achieved tremendous personal success through strategic thinking and effective leadership. At the extractive level, he might focus on maximizing personal compensation, building personal brand recognition, or acquiring other companies primarily to increase his own power and wealth. These objectives, while understandable, ultimately prove limiting because they depend entirely on his continued personal involvement and provide little value to others. At the creative level, the same executive might focus on developing innovative products that solve real problems for users, creating workplace cultures that enable employee growth and satisfaction, or building business models that generate sustainable value for investors, customers, and society. These objectives require the same strategic thinking and leadership skills, but they create value that extends far beyond personal benefit. The shift from extractive to creative thinking requires a fundamental change in how one measures success and satisfaction. The extractive thinker measures success primarily through comparison with others, more wealth, more recognition, more control than competitors or peers. The creative thinker measures success primarily through absolute value creation, problems solved, lives improved, capabilities developed. This change in measurement creates entirely different behavior patterns. The extractive thinker focuses on zero-sum competition, seeking to gain advantage through others' disadvantage. The creative thinker focuses on positive-sum collaboration, seeking to create situations where all parties benefit from cooperation. The extractive thinker hoards information and opportunities to maintain advantage. The creative thinker shares information and opportunities to multiply value creation. The development of creative thinking requires deep understanding of systems and long-term consequences. The extractive thinker typically operates with relatively short time horizons, focusing on immediate gains and quarterly results. The creative thinker operates with much longer time horizons, focusing on sustainable value creation and generational impact. This systems thinking reveals that the most powerful individuals are those who create value for many others simultaneously. The inventor who develops a technology that improves millions of lives wields more real power than the politician who controls government resources. The teacher who inspires thousands of students to excellence creates more lasting influence than the celebrity who attracts temporary attention. The entrepreneur who builds an enterprise that provides good jobs and valuable products exercises more meaningful power than the financier who manipulates markets for personal gain. The recognition of this principle fundamentally alters one's approach to power accumulation and exercise. Instead of seeking power over others, the sophisticated individual seeks power to create value for others. Instead of building systems that extract value from others, he builds systems that generate value for others. Instead of competing to win at others' expense, he competes to create better solutions for shared challenges. This approach proves far more sustainable and satisfying than purely extractive approaches because it aligns individual interests with collective interests. When someone creates genuine value for others, those others naturally support and protect his interests. When someone extracts value from others, those others naturally resist and undermine his efforts. The creative approach generates allies and supporters, while the extractive approach generates enemies and competitors. The implementation of creative power requires sophisticated understanding of human nature and social dynamics. It is not sufficient to simply have good intentions or noble goals. The creative individual must understand how to structure incentives, design systems, and organize efforts to achieve beneficial outcomes efficiently and sustainably. This requires mastery of all the principles discussed in previous sections, but applied in service of larger objectives. Internal sovereignty remains crucial because the temptations to return to extractive thinking are constant and powerful. External influence skills become essential for building coalitions and inspiring others to support creative endeavors. Strategic thinking becomes vital for designing approaches that achieve beneficial outcomes despite human nature's tendency toward short-term, self-interested thinking. The creative exercise of power also requires exceptional patience and persistence. Extractive approaches often generate immediate results because they involve taking value that already exists. Creative approaches typically require extended periods of investment and development before they generate visible results. The creative individual must be prepared to work for years or even decades before seeing full fruition of his efforts. This long-term orientation requires a different relationship with recognition and reward. The extractive individual typically seeks immediate acknowledgement and compensation for his efforts. The creative individual must be prepared to work without immediate recognition, understanding that the most valuable contributions often take considerable time to be fully appreciated. The history of human progress is largely the story of individuals who chose creative over extractive approaches to power. The scientists who dedicated their lives to understanding natural phenomena rather than seeking immediate practical applications. The inventors who spent years developing new technologies rather than exploiting existing ones. The entrepreneurs who built businesses to solve problems rather than simply generate profits. The leaders who focused on developing their societies rather than merely ruling them. These individuals often faced significant resistance and criticism during their lifetimes. Their long-term focus was often misunderstood by contemporaries who preferred immediate, tangible results. Their willingness to sacrifice short-term gains for long-term value creation was often seen as impractical or naive. Their commitment to principles over expedience was often viewed as rigidity or stubbornness. Yet these individuals ultimately achieved far greater power and influence than their more conventional peers. Their contributions outlasted their lives, their influence spread far beyond their immediate spheres of activity, and their names became associated with genuine progress and improvement. They achieved true immortality through the value they created rather than the positions they held or the wealth they accumulated. The modern individual who seeks to follow this path must understand that it requires all the strength and sophistication discussed in previous sections, but directed toward objectives that transcend immediate self-interest. He must be internally sovereign enough to resist the constant pressure to pursue short-term gains at the expense of long-term value creation. He must be externally effective enough to build coalitions and inspire others to support creative endeavors that may not generate immediate benefits. The creative exercise of power also requires careful attention to sustainability and scalability. It is not sufficient to create value that depends entirely on one individual's continued personal involvement. The truly powerful individual designs systems and builds institutions that can continue creating value even after his direct participation ends. This requires developing others and sharing knowledge rather than hoarding capabilities. The extractive thinker typically tries to make himself indispensable by maintaining exclusive control over key information and relationships. The creative thinker deliberately makes himself dispensable by building capabilities in others and creating systems that function independently. This approach to leadership development and institutional building creates exponential rather than linear impact. The leader who develops 10 other effective leaders creates far more total impact than the leader who personally accomplishes 10 times as much individual work. The teacher who inspires 100 students to excellence creates far more educational impact than the teacher who personally educates 1,000 students. The entrepreneur who builds a business that employs thousands productively creates far more economic impact than the entrepreneur who personally generates enormous individual wealth. The transition to creative power also requires developing new metrics for success and satisfaction. Traditional measures of power, wealth, position, recognition become less important than measures of impact, problems solved, lives improved, capabilities developed. This shift in measurement requires considerable maturity and self-confidence because creative impact is often less visible and less immediately rewarding than extractive achievement. The creative individual must learn to derive satisfaction from others' success, from systemic improvements, and from long-term progress rather than personal advancement. This does not mean becoming selfless or sacrificial, but rather expanding one's definition of self-interest to include broader considerations. The ultimate expression of creative power is the development of principles, systems, and institutions that continue generating value long after their creator's direct involvement ends. The philosopher whose ideas continue influencing human thinking centuries after his death. The inventor whose discoveries enable countless future innovations. The entrepreneur whose business model becomes a template for entire industries. The leader whose governmental or organizational innovations improve millions of lives across generations. These individuals achieve true immortality not through preservation of their physical existence or personal memory, but through the ongoing impact of their creative contributions. They wielded power in its highest form, the power to shape reality in positive directions that persist across time and space. The path to such achievement requires extraordinary discipline, vision, and persistence. It demands the best qualities developed through internal sovereignty and external effectiveness, but applied consistently in service of objectives that transcend immediate personal benefit. It requires the ability to work without immediate reward, to build without immediate recognition, and to invest without immediate return. Yet for those who successfully navigate this path, the rewards prove far more satisfying and significant than anything achievable through purely extractive approaches. They experience the profound satisfaction of creating genuine value for others. They build relationships based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. They leave legacies that make the world measurably better than they found it. Most importantly, they achieve the ultimate form of security and significance. Their contributions become so valuable to others that their memory and influence become self-perpetuating. They need not fear being forgotten or having their work undone because they have created value that others naturally want to preserve and extend. This represents the culmination of Machiavellian development, not the cynical manipulation of others for personal gain that is often associated with his name, but the sophisticated understanding of human nature and social dynamics applied in service of creating lasting value for humanity. It is the path of those who understand that the greatest power comes not from taking from others, but from giving to them, not from creating dependency, but from developing capability, not from building monuments to themselves, but from building foundations for others. The man who destroys his weak self and masters the principles of power discovers that his ultimate strength lies not in his ability to dominate others, but in his capacity to elevate them. He cannot be destroyed by others because he has made himself valuable to them. He cannot be forgotten because he has created things worth remembering. He cannot fail because he has built his success on foundations that strengthen rather than weaken over time. This is the true path forward that transcends all temporary setbacks, all personal limitations, and all external obstacles. It is the path of those who understand that real power is not about what you can take from the world, but about what you can give to it. It is the path of those who recognize that the strongest position is not above others, but alongside them in the service of something greater than any individual achievement. In this lies the final paradox of power. Those who seek it purely for themselves rarely achieve lasting significance, while those who seek it in service of others often achieve immortality. The man who destroys his weak, self-serving nature and rebuilds himself as a force for creative value becomes truly indestructible, not because he cannot be physically harmed or personally defeated, but because he has created something larger than himself that others will naturally preserve and extend long after his personal involvement ends. This is the ultimate victory over weakness, the final triumph over limitation, and the eternal campaign that transforms temporary individual achievement into permanent human progress.